right, it's Saturday morning, June 3rd. Go to File and click on Open. And when it gives you access to your computer, go to Saturday, June 3rd, and we usually copy those onto our desktop so they're easy to find. And you'll see a folder called High Pass Sharpening. You can open the folder, and we're going to start. You'll see here is the PDF file for what I printed out, and we'll discuss a little bit of a change on that as we come to it. But we're going to open just the Palouse High Pass 3683 JPEG. Sherry and I were in the Palouse section of Southeast Washington with Tim Gray, right?
Right.
Yes, with Tim Gray. And this is a picture which calls for some detail enhancement. And if you go and look at the histogram for it, you see, look at the pixels that are in the mid-range in the middle here. It's full of mid-range pixels. And if we could bring, we don't need to get the darks and the whites extremely contrasty. They're already reaching very fine. We want to work on the mid-range. So what we're going to do is do the process called high pass sharpening, which is one of the easiest techniques I can possibly teach. Take a deep breath. We're going to make a copy of the background. You can either do Command or Control J, or you can go up to the word layer in the menu and choose duplicate layer. If you choose layer, duplicate layer, you have a chance to name that layer if you wish. And I'm just going to call it high pass, just for my weak brain so I can figure out what I did on that layer. If you simply made a copy of the background and you want to name that layer, you can go in and double click on any layer's name and retype it. So you can always change the name of a layer if you wish to do so. Now, once we've done that and we're on a separate layer, we go to the filter menu at the top of the page and pop it open. And all the way down, you'll find the word Other. And over in the choices is High Pass. So slide over, select High Pass, and click on it. And you'll get this little window in the middle in which you're going to be choosing how intense you want this to be. And here are the radius is pixels. I gave you a rather small image. So somewhere from 1 to 4 is about the radius for a small image. If you have a full resolution file here, you will discover that you have to raise the radius in order to get the same effect. But this is one of these programs where you practice and you learn what you like, okay? I want you to be aware that one of the good things about the high pass filter is that you can control it with a mask later. I want you to notice that the most contrasty areas, like between these blossoms and the ground, has a halo in it, which is one of the problems we get when we add contrast to an area. We can get rid of that problem by using this high pass filter. So you don't have to worry of whether you're maybe a bit too high. One way to correct it is the mask. The other, of course, is that every layer has an opacity control. If you overdo this filter, you can pull it back on opacity and get what you like. So it's better to be a little stronger than you may want than to underdo it. So I'm going to bring this up to maybe 3.
Could I?
Sure.
What are we looking at when we're looking at this shaded area?
We're
is
looking.
this a mask of some sort?
It's picking out the midtones in the image and adding contrast to them.
So what we're seeing, the stuff that we see is the stuff that's going to be affected.
That's right, absolutely.
Okay. Right.
And this has so much more detail that it gets picked up more than the sky. If you were aiming for the sky, raise the radius. And notice, you can go overboard. It's crazy. I'd never go that high. But you see, it's picking up edges that weren't very predominant in the clouds, but of course it's way overdone in the foreground. So I would tend to stay in that range of like 1 to 4.
Why did it change the color, do you know?
Oh, it's just because it's more intense. It's color here too. And that's another point I'm going to deal with, the color. It is recognizing the color and is picking up color as well as luminosity. And so if you raise the radius, the color becomes more accentuated. And it's overdone, I can tell you, that's crazy. So stay down from 1 to 4 unless your file,
So the more color you're seeing, it means the stronger.
the stronger it
effect.
is, right.
Okay.
The more that shows up here, this is what's being affected by the filter, okay? So I chose 3.3, anywhere in that range. Click OK, and in order to see the results, we go to the blend mode. Remember that famous thing up here where it says normal? You're going to change the blend mode to overlay. You can use either overlay or soft light. Overlay is stronger, soft light is not as strong. But I tend to start with overlay, whereas I realize that Tony Kuiper's luminosity masks, he prefers soft light, which is more gentle, and you can experiment. So choose overlay for now, and obviously that's pretty wild. It even affected the clouds, and we didn't see it doing that. So what you learn is sometimes less is more, but you don't have to worry, do you? How do you make less out of this? Go to the opacity slider right above the layer and grab the word opacity with your mouse button, your left button. Drag it left and lower the percentage. And then lift your thing. You've now got 77% of what I originally set. And how do I know if I like it for sure? I turn it off and turn it on. And to do that, go to that layer, to the eyeball at front. And if you click the eyeball, you turn it off. And if you bring it back, by clicking again. Can you see how it affects the front more than the back, in that there's a lot more edges in the front than there are in the back? Remember, it's looking for the edges within the mid-tone range where there is something darker next to something lighter. And of course, that's what you get when you get texture. You're always getting a contrast that makes texture appear. So in this case, this straight one, now, so you can lower it here if it's too much, or this one did not have any halos. We're going to look at halos in another. If we had halos, let's say this had a glow around the edge here where it hits the dark, we could add a mask, couldn't we? And paint away that part of the sharpening. It doesn't need it here, so we're going to go to another image. That's all it takes to add high-pass sharpening. And we're going to do 3 others, so don't worry if you want to understand it. Close it. Don't.
Wait a minute, did it add noise to the sky?
Well, let's find out.
Looks like it in mine, but
Let me zoom in. I'm at 100%, and I'm going to turn it off. Not badly. I'm not, if it does, you probably added too much. I don't generally notice that, but it's a good question. If you think it added noise to here, then you add a mask and you reduce the effect on the sky only. How would you do that? You'd have a mask. Let's make it fit screen. View, fit on screen, Command or Control 0. Let's say it's too much there, that it made it noisy. Go up to your Layers panel, and you have a rectangle with a light gray circle in the middle which says Add Layer Mask. Click it. Because it's white, it has done nothing to your image. White reveals everything on that layer. If I want to reduce the power of the sky and not of the foreground, I'm going to have a low opacity black brush. So come over here, and in the tools, find the brush tool. Check to be sure your foreground color is black. If you have purple and green, you can hit D key for the default, or you have a little black and white square in the corner of this color picker, and it will restore your black and whites. And the bent arrow will exchange the black and white, foreground and background. Mine is fine. I have a brush that's black. over here, I would like it to be soft. And I have used this as a harder brush. So I can see it doesn't have fuzzy enough edges. Let me remind you how we very carefully control the hardness of a brush without jumping to presets. You hold down the shift key with your left hand or your right. No, I guess it has to be left. And then go to those bracket keys next to the letter P that normally will make a brush larger or smaller. But with the shift key down, it makes it harder or softer. So if I have the shift and I find the left bracket key right next to the letter P and I hit it, I'm going to soften that brush. If I hit the right one, can you see it getting hard? Left one gets soft. So if you're not sure whether it's soft enough, you do the same bracket keys that you use for sizing, but you hold down the shift key while you do it. I know it's soft. And I don't want to completely wipe out the high pass sharpening, but I want to reduce it a little bit. So I need to go to the opacity of this brush. If I bring it down to like 30%, I'm not going to lose all of that high pass sharpening, but I'm going to get rid of a little of it and perhaps get rid of any grain you see. So bring your brush up to the sky, make it bigger, right bracket key. And I'm going to swipe now. It's when you do this and you paint on a mask, it's important to hold the mouse button down and don't lift it up till you have covered the entire sky. You want one application of 30% over this. So down goes my button and I start to go across, and it doesn't matter if I overlap where I went before. As long as I don't raise my finger, I can go back over it as much as I want. And all I've done is add a 30% black over the mask. I lift my finger and look at the mask. If it didn't work for you, you've got to see, are you on the mask? First of all, you can't paint on a mask if the picture is active. So whenever you paint on a mask, I can undo that. You have to be sure the mask is selected, and that has a little glowing blue line around it. Then with it selected, I come over and I grab a brush, and it's black, it's soft, and the opacity is 30%. And one more thing, the mode has to be normal. If you have played around with the brush and changed its mode, it remembers what you did the last time you used it. And there are some cute things we do where we change the mode. And if you've got something other than normal, it won't work. Providing it's normal, make it big enough. Once your button goes down, don't lift it till you've covered the entire sky. And it doesn't matter if you go back over any area more than once, because you haven't lifted your finger, and all you're applying is 30% black, which is gray. I lift it, and you'll see how evenly I applied that. That means I reduced the strength of the high pass sharpening over the sky, and I didn't reduce it over the foreground. Okay? Some of the little tools I'm going to show you today are of minor importance compared to learning how to use layers and masks. They will have a bigger impact on the quality of your processing than anything else you can learn to do. So whenever we work with them, be sure you understand and that you go home and practice them. The reason for giving you these is you can go home on your own and develop the same image all over again. Be sure you understand. Okay.
Mary Lou?
Yes.
Did that have to be on overlay still, or could you run back to normal when you're masking out?
No, if this is on, if you go back to, well, it'll work, but you won't see it. If you go back to normal, you can't see it. You see what happens?
Well, I see, because you're still working on that layer, you have to stay with the
That's right. If you want to see the layer, it has to be overlay. Or if you wonder and you haven't closed it yet, change it to soft light. See if you can see the difference. Little bit. It's a little less intense. So soft light versus overlay is minor change, but if you go back and forth, you will see you get more high pass sharpening with overlay. So I suppose that's another way to reduce the power of it, isn't it? You could change the blend mode if you wanted to. Okay. Now, when you close this, don't save it because you want it to be home for practice. Just say don't save. And I find when you look at the tutorial I've given you in paper, it uses this image. So there's a value in reworking that tutorial with the same image, and that's why I've given it to you. Okay. File, open. You should be in the high pass sharpening folder where you were before. I want you to get all three pictures, 1, 2, and 3. If you grab outside the area and drag, you can cover all three with one drag of your mouse. Otherwise, you click the first one and you shift click the last one. Same thing. Okay, open all three. I'm going to go, if yours are hanging freely and are not tabbed, for the purpose of this class, I'm going to go up to the window menu where it says images, and I'm going to consolidate all three images to the tab bar.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you're in Photoshop Elements, you have one little extra benefit. Down here in the very bottom, you have a thing called Photo Bin. If you temporarily turn it on, it shows you all three images that are tabbed up there. And if you don't know whether it's picture 1, 2, or 3 that you want, you can look down here, choose the one you want, and click on it, and it will be an active one. We want picture 1. And now that you have this here, it stays until you use a tool or till you leave the photo bin at the bottom and go to tool options. This area in Elements is shared by the photo bin, which at times is very useful, and the tool options, which are always useful. But you never have to worry. It'll go back and forth for you. All right, so I would like to enhance the clouds. Obviously, there's nothing in the sky to enhance. I know I've got a possible problem because of the bright area between the clouds and the sky. Whenever you have an area of high contrast, you're likely to pick up halos when you add contrast. It's just part of what happens. But we know in our mind that we can get rid of those halos with a mask, so we don't worry about it. Instead, we make a copy of the background. Command and Control J, or layer, duplicate layer. I went Command or Control J, and I have a layer simply called Layer 1. I want to call it High Pass. So I double click on the file name, and it becomes selectable, and I can type High Pass. So either way, you can rename a layer. And if you like to get organized or you think you won't remember later what you did on a layer, it's always helpful to name it. Okay, so what's the next thing? We've got our separate layer. Go to the Filter menu, pull all the way down to Other, move over and choose High Pass. Now, this preview button is wonderful because you can see everything when you look at it. Now, I want to enhance the clouds. And you can see immediately there's a problem where the contrast is high with the sky. But your mind says that's no problem. I can use a mask to get rid of that halo. So all you care about is that you get some nice detail in the clouds. And again, if you've got a small file, and this is a very small file, you are already at 100%. It doesn't need to be a very high radius. If you were using a high resolution file from your camera, the radius might have to go up a bit to get the same visual effect. So I'm going to guess that that's all right. And my mind says, you know, it's better to overdo this a little bit because I can always reduce the opacity. So I'm reconsidering and I'm raising it up a little. Saying if it's too much, I can take it down. Click OK. To see the effect, change the blend mode from normal to overlay. To see what you did, hide the high pass layer by clicking on the eyeball and bring it back. Can you see the difference? Now, let's say I got it and I said, well, I like it, but maybe it's too much for me. I go to the opacity slider. You grab the word opacity. In Photoshop words, they call this a sticky slider. If you grab the word and drag, you can lower the opacity. So you have that control if you think it's too much. And because I don't want everybody's eye to be completely drawn to that point down here where they meet, I'm going to add a mask. So remember, in the Layers panel, top in Elements, bottom in Full Photoshop, you have a little rectangle with a light gray circle. When you point to it, it says Add Layer Mask. Click it. And remember, a white mask doesn't change anything because white reveals. It reveals everything you did. But you can selectively hide part of the effect of that layer. So we're going to do just what we did before. We're coming over to the tools. We're choosing the brush tool, the black foreground color, a soft brush, and something less than full opacity. I don't want to completely lose all of the effect. So you decide whether it's 30 or 50%, and you have to be sure your mode stays normal. Now, I size my brush, way too big a brush. The left bracket key, I'm just trying to work on the area close to where the horizon and the sky meet. And now keep my mouse button down. I'm going to go around here and up and over and down. And actually the edge is probably more up there where the sky is. I can go over it again. I'm not reducing it anymore. As long as my finger doesn't come up, I have only whatever percent I did. Lift it up. Look at the mask. Did I completely hide the effect? No. If that was black, I would have completely hidden it, but I chose 30%. Let's say it wasn't enough. I think it's fine. But let's say I really wanted to remove more. I could go back over it with a second pass and take 30% more away. That's the reason why it's critical to control your mouse button. When you lift it and you go back to it, it adds 30% more. As long as the button stays down, you don't add more than one pass.
So you've got two opacities. You've got one on the brush, and then you've got the one on the overlay.
No, on the layer.
On the layer.
Yes.
Okay. So they are two separate things.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's wonderful control because this one affects the opacity of the entire layer.
Oh, yeah.
And this one just of what you brush.
Excellent.
Yeah. So you can make it more if you want to. And how do I know what the mask did to that layer? I can hide just the mask. Good old Shift key again. Find it in the dark, hold it down, click on the mask, and you hide it. This is the image before the mask. This is the image after the mask. Can you see the subtle difference where they join? Very subtle. If you want a greater effect, you would paint again. But I'm watching right up here, if you're looking at the screen, this is an area right in here where I had seen some halos. So I'm going to hide the mask. Can you see that halo around the edge there? If I had a high resolution file and you could zoom in on it more, you'd see that halo. But we're already at 100%, and when you zoom in more, you get blurs in the image, and it's hard to see. So a very good little trick. When you want to see what you did by adding a mask, you hold the Shift key and click the mask, and it turns it off. And then you click it again, and you turn the mask back on. Okay? When you want to see the entire effect of your work, you have two choices. If you had 8 layers you were working on and you want to go back to the beginning, you would go to the background layer, and with the Alt-Option key down, you do the eyeball of the background, and it turns off all the layers above it. Can you see the benefit of that if you have many layers? In our case, we can get the same effect by just turning off the only layer we have above. Look what that did to the clouds. I like the high-pass filter for clouds. It's one of the ways I think it makes a big difference. Okay, now just shut down picture 1 and don't save it. Let's go to picture 2. This is this wild sky. I put this in here because we have 2 other ways that we can work with the high-pass filter, either to accentuate the effect or to reduce the effect on a colored image. On this one, we're going to add the high-pass filter because obviously I would love to have more punch in the sharpness of the sky. It's got all the color and maybe more than you need. But I would like to have a little more contrast in all the fascinating detail in that sky. I'm aware I've got a potential problem down here. Look at the contrast between the trees and the sky. That high contrast gets into trouble with the high-pass filter, but we know how to get rid of it with a mask, so we don't have to worry about it. So let's do our procedure. Copy the background, either layer, duplicate layer, or Command or Control J, and if you like to be organized more, you can name it high pass. None of that changes the work, it just is a way of being a little anal about it. Okay, now you're going to add that high pass filter, so go to Filter, come all the way down to Other, come all the way over and choose High Pass. You're now going to decide how much radius you want. And in choosing the radius, I know my problem. You can see the glow right here. But I don't have to worry about it because I have a solution to it. So I'm mostly wondering what I can do with the detail in the sky. And you can play around, and again, remember, an image that has high resolution will take a higher radius to get the same effect. This works fine for me. I'm leaving mine at about 3.8. And I'm saying, okay. I'm then changing the blend mode to overlay. And then, of course, I want to say, what did I do? Come to the beginning and turn it off and turn it on. All right. There are 2 things we can do to the high pass layer. One of them will accentuate the effect, and the other one, that would be good where your contrast in your mid-range isn't very good. You didn't have much to work with, and you want to enhance it. Or in this case, the color can get in the way of this filter. So we're going to desaturate this layer. The simplest way, we don't need an adjustment layer because this is not something we're going to build on. It's just a change to this filter. So the way to get immediately to a hue and saturation change is to hold down Control on Windows, Command on Mac, and type the letter U. Think unsaturate. That's the only way I can remember it. And guess what it does? It brings up that same control, and my reason for not using an adjustment layer is I don't need to keep it, do I? As simply adjusting the filter. So take your saturation, leave it on master. Take your saturation, drag it all the way to the left. That's all you do, and say OK. You have reduced some of the intensity of the color in that layer. Let's.
The oranges and the yellows?
Yeah, all of the color has been taken out of the filter, not off the original image. It's just reduced from the filter. Now, the best way to see this is to go to your history panel. I hope everybody has one. Open it. Can you see the steps we took? And the last one was where we reduced the saturation. Move up to blending change. It's subtle. Go to that and come down to the last one. Can you see the subtle change in the color? It will be even more powerful if the colors are not at all muted. These are somewhat muted colors. If you had a sun that was extremely bright, you'd notice it more. But it's one way of modifying the effect when your image has color in it, okay? So that's one way of doing that. And now what we're going to do is say, I can see halos. Can you see them around here? There's just that extreme bright edge on the black. To see them, turn off this high pass layer with the eyeball. Turn it on. Can you see the trees?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, you might like some of that, but I say beware whenever you sharpen, whatever method you use, inspect your picture for halos. And realize that if you're working on a separate layer, and of course you always should be, you can reduce the effect of the sharpening over just the area that is a problem. So I'm going to add a mask. We all know where that is. I'm going to go and get the brush, which is black, which is soft, at about 30%. I could go up to 50 for the heck of it. Doesn't matter. If I think it warrants more, I'll go to 50. And of course my brush mode must be normal. I now size it so I think it's about the right size for brushing over this area. With the button down, I trace the edge of that trees very carefully all the way along. I'm not worried about the area to the right. It doesn't bother me. If I wonder, did I miss something? I go back over it. And it won't make any difference how many times I go over it, providing I don't lift up my mouse button. Now I lift it up, and you can see I took 50%. Can you see it's a little darker than my 30 was? And now I want to see what does the before and after with the mask look. How do I turn off a mask? Hold the Shift key, click the mask, and turn it off. Can you see this? Yes. If you had a higher resolution image, you also would have more to work with in terms of noticing changes than I do in this small file. But you can see it. Now, let's say I turn it back on, the mask. I still think it's too much. All I would do is go back over it with either 50% more, or if I don't want that much more, I could lower the opacity and go over it again and get a little more of it off. If I think it bothered me and there was still too much glow, I could go over it. You see how I've darkened it? If it turns totally black, I've hidden the entire effect from around the trees. And what's wonderful about these is it's entire up to you as the photographic artist to decide what you want in your final image. And it's only up to a judge to comment, okay? It's up to you to decide what you like. And when a judge looks at it, all you're doing is getting the opinion of a judge. It's worth listening to. They have a lot of wisdom to impart, but they are not the final decision maker on what you like. Okay. Now, if everybody in a club tells you you're just got halos all over your images, you might kind of sit back and say, I might listen. But don't let one judge's comment change your opinion of something. Okay. Close this. Remember, just close out picture 2, not the whole thing. Don't save it. Now we have one where we're going to enhance the effect. I don't have a lot of edges up here, do I? It's kind of a blah cloud. I know I have a problem. Can you look down here? This is a silly image. I grabbed this somewhere. I don't even know where I got it. But, you know, obviously, if this was your image, you would straighten that telephone pole with a transform tool and skew. Poor thing, but we don't care about that. So I know I've got a problem down here where I have high contrast, but I know I have a tool to take care of the problem. What I want is to bring more interest in those clouds. This picture was taken, I think it's from a tutorial I saw one time. Anyway, it was taken over a plaza, evidently. You can see the buildings. Okay, so how do we start high pass? We make a copy of the background, and if you like it, you may rename that to say high pass. I'm better typing today, folks. I haven't made mistakes with the keyboard. Okay, and now we've got to use the high pass filter on that duplicate layer. go to Filter, pop it open. Come all the way down to the word Other and choose High Pass. And now I'm looking at the clouds. So I'm going to say, does it help to raise it? Oh, it does help a little. I know I've got I have lots of controls ahead of me, but I certainly have a layer opacity control. So if I crazy overdo this, I can immediately reduce it. If I underplay it, I got to go back and do it over again. So be aware, it's better to be a little on the strong side. So I'm going to be wild. I'm going to take it up to 6 and say, okay, change the blend mode to overlay. Okay, let's see the before and after. Go to the eyeball of the high pass layer. Wow, much better. But because this whole area up here had very little contrast, it had very little effect. I'm going to show you a way to strengthen the effect of a high pass filter. So you're on the high pass layer. We're going to apply a levels adjustment with the keyboard. This time it's Control or Command L. L for levels. This is the only thing this is kind of neat. These are the pixels the high pass filter chose to work on. Can you see how it picked the mid-range? And it faded out fewer and fewer as it goes out. We're going to drag the left and right points in first till they touch the edge of the histogram. Bring them in just to the edge of the histogram. And if you do it correctly, your midpoint should be under the peak. So when you do it, be sure you leave it in the middle, right smack under the peak. Just move this out of the way. Just slide it over so you can see. What you've done there is really increase that a lot. Now remember, we can reduce in varying amounts where we see this effect, can't we? The other thing you can do in some pictures is go further in. I'm going to go further in, but I must do an equal adjustment on both ends. And how do I know it's equal? When the midpoint ends up back in the middle of the peak. That enhances it even more. And guess what? We've got a preview button. Turn it off. Turn it on. Can you see how it increases it? What it says is we want to make more of the midpoint. We want to increase the amount of midpoint pixels it's choosing. By doing this, we actually effectively stretch the midpoint out a bit, and it's picking up more edges. Now, at this one, you can decide what you like. I'm going to back them out, I think, to the edges. That was a little overdone for me. But you can leave it in, because you're not stuck with it at the end. Say, okay. Now, what did I do on that layer totally? Well, I go to the eyeball and turn it off. And I turn it on. Now, right away, can you see the awful halos on the bottom? This is the best example of them. You know why it's a good example? This is really high contrast, isn't it? Total black trees in the foreground. So, add your layer mask. Go over to your brush. Make sure it's black. Choose your opacity. I'm going to make it like maybe 40% just for the heck of it. Anywhere in that low range. It's soft and it's normal. And when I get ready, I have to decide if that's about the right size. I think it's about the right size brush. Before I use it, my mouse goes down and I don't lift it. All the time I'm painting. Go across everything. And if I think that I haven't done it well, I can go back over it and it won't make any difference. Sometimes I just miss something. So I'm going to go back over it, and I've never lifted my mouse button. Now I lift it, and I have a very low change in that area. And if it isn't enough, I go back over it again. The second time, since I've lifted my mouse button, I will get another reduction by whatever percent opacity I chose. So if I think I didn't do enough, I go back over it again. I can keep the same amount Or if I just want to add a little bit more, I lower the opacity. So I'm not adding as much, but I'm adding a little more effect over it because I think there's still some glow that bothers me. And I'm making it darker. Now, I want you to know there's one spot that bothers me more than the others. Right here, because there's higher contrast. So I can go back over just that area until I like the result. This tree bothers me. So I can go over that tree until that part of it I've actually completely gotten rid of the high pass filter from that tree. But because my brush was soft, you can't see where my brush ended and the changes occurred. So I've done that. I can then look at it and say, well, I like what that extra levels did for some of this up here. But you know what? It's a bit more than I want down here. So I can go and paint this whole area with a very low opacity brush and just cut back on that extra sharpening here where it doesn't need it and leave it up here where I liked it. If I need to be reminded, I always go back to the layers eyeball. It certainly improved the clouds. But I'm going to say maybe this is pretty sharp in here, this edges here. Maybe I want to lower those a little bit too. So I decide how much opacity. Maybe 25%. If I swipe this with 25% and I don't like the result, I immediately undo the last action. Control or Command Z or go to your history panel and come up one level and you've gotten rid of your last thing. So I can safely try to apply it in here. I think it was just a bit too much in that area. Okay, remember I haven't lifted my mouse, so it doesn't matter how many times I go over it, I don't want to miss anything. Now I lift my mouse. Can you see the little bit of gray I added here? That was where I reduced that one area. So here's the before and after of the mask. Hold the Shift key. Click the mask. And after. First of all, look at the trees. You can see how we improved that middle tree. And now put your eye up at the bright part of the clouds. Minor, I only brought it down 25%. But I did bring down some of this contrast in this area. So what I really want you to know is that when you have a mask, you are 100% in control of the effect you're applying. You're not saying, well, here's a nice little gadget. I think I'll use it. Oh. You're saying, this technique might be useful, but maybe I don't want it on the entire image. Maybe I'd like to reduce where its effect. That's what your mask gives you. And just like everything else we do, it's very useful in high-pass sharpening. So I hope that this will enable you to go over your images. Look for some where you had a beautiful sky and try playing with it to see whether you like what it does. And remember, if it affects the part of the image you don't want affected, you mask it out.